Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. Barry Jones, SP History, and we are continuing our series on the formation of the deep state. This channel is called Treasonous Cabal, and we are looking at the evolution, the the crossing of the Rubicon from treachery into treason. And what we've been learning is about the ultra vires doctrine, or the act that was passed after the Civil War to aid and assist in the rise of corporate America. And of course, ultra vires was the stipulation that corporations existed for only one purpose, that was to maximize profits. And if you considered the public interest at all in any of your decision making, you could be fired for cause. And then also it immunized everybody personally involved in the corporation, and also the corporation's assets and its income from tax liability and from civil litigation. So the corporations were set up in such a way so as to exploit, take advantage of people, so as to become these power elites, sometimes referred to as the deep state. And as such, these corporations did become massive, very rich, and the 50 or 60 owners that ran all these corporations, though the corporations may have been on their face appearing to be thousands of corporations, they were really just a few under 100, and they had been split into subsidiaries, shell companies to hide their assets and their income. But there's really about 50 or 60 people running all of these. And as such, not only were they running these corporations, which hired all the workers and created all the wealth, they were essentially running the U.S. economy. And because they were so wealthy and because they were so influential with the U.S. economy, they also ran Washington, in the sense that they were the ones with the purse strings who gave all the donations to the congressmen and senators, and presidents who were running for office. So anytime they wanted to, they could reach out and touch somebody, whichever congressman they owned or rented, and they could get what they wanted passed. I used as an example way back when we were talking about that was how they got the law passed that if you were a worker in one of these corporations, you could not quit as long as you owed the company money. And most everybody owed the company money in some form or fashion, whether it be rent for their house or groceries from the company store, supplies, whichever. Uh, and so you couldn't quit. If you did, you were a fugitive from justice, and you'd be hunted down by the Pinkertons. And the debt, if you died, uh, would fall to your children. So it was generational wage slavery is what it was. So here we are, right on the back end of having freed the slaves after the Civil War. And we've created a completely new form of slavery, all to benefit these corporate owners, which isn't that much different from the plantation owners back during the slave days. So the question is, did we make it worse? Did we really make it better? Anyway, so these corporate owners, uh, in the rise of the corporation, uh, seamlessly transitions into the next big era in American history, which is the rise of imperialism. And we defined imperialism as the strong dominating the weak for purposes of getting natural resources, uh, for purposes of getting foreign territories, so you could uh, expand your dominance, your empire, also put military presence there so you can have a command presence around the world in this new empire building, for the purposes of markets. You're making all these products, American people can't consume them all. You supply and demand demands, you keep that uh, demand curve high, so that you continue to make lots of money. So you got to have overseas markets. You like to control those overseas markets. And then social Darwinism was the excuse, the justification, the rationalization that it's okay. These indigenous peoples aren't any different than the unfit millions of workers in America, whom the fit exploit and take advantage of, because the whole world is divided into two groups of people, fit and unfit, whether here at home or abroad. And because life is a competitive struggle. It's either us or them. It's either we're going to kill or be killed. We're going to target or be targeted. We're going to exploit or be exploited. Uh, and the idea was if we don't take these foreign territories and exploit these indigenous peoples, just like we've been exploiting our own unfit people, somebody else will. And at some point, these empires inevitably will clash with one another. At some point, they're going to view us as a target. They're going to take us. So that's the essence of Darwinism. So that led us into this moment in time when Americans began looking abroad, saying, "Boy, we'd sure like that sugar cane that they grow in Hawaii, and Queen Lily's becoming a problem. Let's go take her out and annex Hawaii into the United States, and voila, uh, we've got a place where we can grow sugar cane for the sugar industry, for the United Fruit Company, for California, uh, pineapple, for Dole pineapple. We've put our own guy, Sanford Dole, in charge over there. So it's not like we're trying to hide our intentions." And then they looked around and they said, there's another place that's even closer on the southern edge of the United States called Cuba. And all those same companies would like to grow sugarcane. Of course, it was even more. There were other interests in Cuba involving mining and public utilities, and all kinds of, but including sugarcane as well. Why don't we take Cuba? The problem is Cuba was a colony of Spain. So we're going to have to gin up a controversy with Spain so we can convince the American people it's worth our first foreign war to take out Spain so we can get Cuba. And so we learned that through the media, the American people were propagandized to believe the Spaniards were treating the Cubans terribly, which they probably were, but it wasn't our problem, right? It became our problem next when we published an alleged letter by the Spanish ambassador insulting our president, calling me a weak and stupid politician. All of a sudden, Americans, the jingoism rises up. The Americans, that's fighting words. And right on the heels of that, our government launches a false flag attack against their own ship, the USS Maine, sinks it and blames Spain for the death of 266 American naval officers and servicemen. So now the American people's, the pump has been primed. And the American people are fully supportive of our first foreign war. And this has all been ginned up through a psyop ordered by these 50 or 60 uh, power elites that want Cuba just like they wanted Hawaii, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. And so they ran a psyop against the American people. The American people bought it. We didn't find out about the sinking of the USS Maine, how it was a false flag until 75 years later, 1975, during the Church hearings, when the CIA's own documents uh, pointed to it as our first successful false flag in an effort to get JFK to authorize Operation Northwoods and another series of false flags to again lay the blame at the feet of Cuba this time so we can take out Castro and get our hands on Cuba. This issue was the same. It was Cuba again. So these power elites have been running these scams, these hoaxes against American people for a long time. This isn't new. When we left off, we were, we concluded the war. It was a quote splendid little war that we won quickly and easily. Teddy Roosevelt, thanks to him, he's a large part of the reason why we won. And boy, look at the goodies we got out of it. We got all these colony holdings that Spain used to control. Cuba. Now, remember, the Cubans had been smart, forced us to sign the Teller Amendment, which said we can't annex Cuba the way we did Hawaii. But it's not going to stop us from getting our hands on their resources. It's not going to stop us from putting a big naval base, Guantanamo, there in Cuba. And for all intents and purposes, yes, Cuba would not become a state, would not become annexed territory, but because it fell within our sphere of influence, because we helped them in their little revolution, if you want to call it that, we have final say over what happens in Cuba. And it becomes a source of continuing irritation, problems for us going forward. It culminates almost 100 years later in the assassination of JFK. Goes that far back. Anyway, also included in that list of goodies were colonies in Asia, Philippines. We got Guam, we got Puerto Rico, Wake Island. You say, well, those were just, that's just collateral damage, right? Spain loses the war, we get all of Spain's holdings. I would like submit and hope to prove by the end of today that that was the overall point of this Spanish-American War. Was these power elites are always looking at what's coming next. We're looking at what's happening now. We're looking at, you know, this war with Spain, and most Americans are believing it has everything to do with Cuba, and it did have something to do with Cuba. We wanted Cuba, and we wanted their natural resources, we wanted their territory. But there are some other benefits to be gained that are bigger and more substantial, more far-reaching. And you could kind of say Cuba is the short-term goal, but Asia is the long-term goal. And of course, at this time, we don't have any presence in Asia. We don't have any colonies there. We don't have any trade agreements there, other than the one we negotiated ham-handedly with Japan when we sailed our Navy into their harbor and forced them to agree to our trade demands. But we really have no presence in that part of the world. And remember now, one of the primary goals of imperialism is to expand your markets, to have people to buy your goods. And there is no bigger market in the world than Asia, especially when you put China and India together, but even China by itself. There's no market that rivals China. And we have, at this moment in time, we have no relationship with China at all. But we will, and you'll see as we go forward. All right. So let's look at, I'm going to briefly tell the story of what happens in the Philippines next, because the Filipinos, I told you this was going to happen. They woke up one morning and realized, they'd been celebrating their independence from Spain. Now all of a sudden they realized, oh, the Spaniards didn't surrender to us. The Spaniards surrendered to the Americans. Crap. That means we've traded one master for another. So Emilioaguinaldo, who I compared to our version of George Washington, goes back out and re-recruits his Filipino rebels and says, listen, it's not over. We have a new enemy, and that's the bad news. And the worst news is this enemy is more powerful than the previous one. And they pretend to be on our side, but we don't want to be anybody's colonial holdings. And so the insurrection begins, and now the United States, and you won't find this in any history book. Nobody, there isn't anything in the history books about the Americans fighting the Filipinos after the Spanish-American War. So essentially what's happened is we broke it, and now we have to buy it, right? Kind of like the war in Iraq. We go in and we liberate Iraq from Saddam Hussein, and then the Iraqis realize, oh, that just puts us under a different master. So then they rise up against us. And it turns into this long, grueling second war, so to speak, an addendum to the first war. And of course, the Filipinos are outgunned, and they have to use guerrilla warfare. And this is an ironic twist. When we were the colony fighting for our independence, we used guerrilla tactics against the British and succeeded beyond our wildest dreams. Now the Filipinos view us as the behemoth, the occupying power. And so they're using the same tactics we used against the British. Now they're using them against us. It's interesting. Another irony is the whole reason we got into this war to begin with is that we accused through the propaganda that we spoon-fed the American people. We were constantly accusing the Spanish of atrocities against the Cuban people. And of course, by extension, since the Philippines was also a colony of the Spanish, we accused them of atrocities against the Filipinos as well. But isn't it interesting that now that we are the occupying power, we begin treating the Filipinos the exact same way the Spanish, we accused the Spanish of treating the Filipinos and the Cubans. We began gathering them, there's a picture of it, into concentration camps. We didn't know who the enemy was. That was our forced frustration because they didn't wear uniforms. Remember, guerrilla tactics. So we just start rounding them all up. We'll later replicate this strategy in Korea and Vietnam over and over again. And so uh, we told our soldiers, here's an example. U.S. General Jacob Smith gathered his soldiers together one morning and he gave them the order. He says, quote, "I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill and burn, the better you will please me." So marching orders are basically sanctioned by the state genocide. This is our strategy to defeat the Filipinos. Just so you understand, this is not unique to the American military. This has its roots. And again, the social Darwinist elites of our society back home, the San Francisco Argonaut in 1902, in an editorial published the following quote: "Let us all be frank. We do not want the Filipinos. We do want the Philippines. All of our troubles in this annexation matter have been caused by the presence in the Philippines of the Filipinos. The more of them killed, the better. It seems harsh, but they must yield before the superior race." I don't know where to begin with that. I mean, it's such a loaded statement. It demonstrates clearly this unfit versus fit struggle. It demonstrates clearly this idea that there's a superior race and everybody else is unfit. It rationalizes and justifies genocide. This is the problem's not the Philippines, it's the Filipinos. We need to kill them, and the more of them, the better. They must yield before the superior race. And we were actually outraged that they weren't yielding. It's unbelievable. This is what happens when you start down this slippery slope. When you start categorizing people by fit, unfit categories, when you start elevating one group of people above another, it always ends up in genocide. It starts off with minor little discriminatory practices, stereotypes that always ends up in genocide. And here, this is why you don't see this in the history books. We don't learn about it because the Americans are doing it to the Filipinos. We don't have to do it to the Cubans. The Cubans have fallen in line, but the Filipinos are fighting back. And so this is our strategy to defeat them. Well, inevitably, because we're the big bad United States, we defeat this insurrection. We capture Aguinaldo, pictured here at the bottom, and the insurrection sort of, and the same thing would have happened in our War of Revolution if the British had ever gotten George Washington. That's why they kept shooting horses out from underneath him. They wanted to capture George Washington because they felt like he was the sort of the more than just the figurehead. He was the inspiration behind the revolution, and the troops, though they were suffering at Valley Forge and other places, would continue on to their death fighting for this man. So let's take him out. Well, we took out Aguinaldo. In the end, more Americans died in the Filipino insurrection than the original Spanish-American War. Remember, there were 3,000 American casualties in the Spanish-American War. Here's this almost double, 5,000. We spent $400 million to kill 200,000 Filipinos in this insurrection. Originally, we told them, hey, we're coming to help you defeat the Spaniards. In the end, way more Filipinos died at the hands of the Americans than they did the Spanish. So what happens next? We grant them some measure of limited self-rule. We sent over William Howard Taft, later becomes a U.S. president. He's the governor, and to keep the Filipinos in line and prevent any more insurrections, he gives them some measures of self-rule, some autonomy, and promised through an act of Congress called the Jones Act that in 30 years you can have your independence. Until then, we're going to establish our roots. We're going to put down a huge military base here. We'll negotiate later, when on the terms 30 years from now, when we're negotiating your independence, complete and total independence, understand that base is going to stay. Okay, but politically, you'll have some measure of independence, but it's delayed, right? 30 years. Give us time to build a base. Give us time to teach you guys about American democracy so you can transition to become a country just like us, built in our image, so to speak. So it you see what happens. We literally took the Philippines from the Spanish, and then we took it from the Filipinos. Just like we took Hawaii from Queen Lily and the Hawaiians, we have now taken the Filipinos from two countries, the Spanish first, the Filipinos second. We have gotten, as I said, Puerto Rico and Guam, and we've gotten access into Cuba. Now, we didn't get Cuba, like we can't annex Cuba, but we're going to get what we want out of Cuba. We're going to get the natural resources, and we're going to get the military base. So this is why they call it a splendid little war. If it ended there, I would say, yes, it was all about getting into the colonial game, beginning our empire building itself, and taking Spain's empire or colonial holdings for our own. But I believe it's much bigger than that. I believe we needed the Philippines, which is why we attacked the Philippines first, is because that was the ultimate agenda item. It was to establish a beachhead in a part of the world that we didn't have any influence and we had no presence in. And if we can get access to the Philippines and put military bases there, now we have entrance into a part of the world where the potential for the markets there are out of this world. And uh, of course, the plum or the prize in that is China. And we have no relationship at this time with China. Britain, France, Germany, Japan, Russia have all carved China into zones that they control. And within each one of those zones, they trade. It's basically a miniature little colony. The Chinese, historically, though it's a big country, a lot of people, were not able to withstand the outside pressures, and they were always being interfered with. They were always being the other countries were always in minding the Chinese business, so to speak. But one country, just like in Africa, I showed you that map where when turn of the century happened, the United States had zero presence in Africa. All these other countries had colonial holdings there. The same is true in China. We didn't have any presence. We didn't have any zone. We were frozen out of Chinese trade. And now these power elites are saying, okay, that is going to change. We now have a military presence in the Philippines, and our military is at least equal to, if not greater than, all of our competitors there in China. We are a force to be reasoned with. We just won a war. We've shown a willingness to use our military forces for these purposes, and we mean business. Yes, Cuba is great, and we're going to enjoy those natural resources, and we're going to enjoy trading trading with the Cubans, and we're going to have a military base there. But we want China. That's the prize. And now with this military base in the Philippines, we are in a position to exert some measure of influence there. Now, the Chinese were in the middle of a rebellion, just like it's the same playbook. Okay, the Chinese peasants are leading a rebellion against these quote foreign devils, these British, these French, these Russian, these German, all these what they called foreign devils that were interfering constantly in their country. Just like the Cubans were involved in a rebellion against the Spanish, just like the Filipinos were involved in a rebellion against the Spanish, we come in claiming to be on their side. But we have an eye towards domination when, after the conflict is over and we have succeeded, they're going to owe us. All right. So we use the same daggum strategy. We come in and we offer our assistance to the Chinese in this Boxer rebellion. And they say, well, what you could do to help us is to warn these folks off that are trying to exploit, take advantage of us. If they, We're just peasants. There's not much we're going to accomplish in this rebellion. We're going to try, but we're probably going to fail. But if you would warn them off, or at least introduce yourself into this confidence, it might be a, what's the word I'm looking for? A deterrent towards these countries continuing to interfere if they think they might have to hassle with the United States. If the United States is right now we're being interfered with by all these foreign devils, and they've all sliced and diced China into all these different zones, and we have no say in it, and they are sort of cooperating with each other. But if the United States enters the equation, it throws all these zones and all these partitions that have been drawn up and all this cooperative arrangements that have been made. It throws it all into confusion. And you guys are the new power on the block. So you have a potential to really help us in that respect. So anyway, John Hay, our Secretary of State, issues a warning to these nations acting in concert with the Chinese, saying that the United States is the new kid on the block, and as such, we expect, quote, equality of treatment for commerce in China. And it opens the door for the United States to intervene in China's affairs. Of course, the implication is we're gonna intervene on behalf of China against these foreign devils. And now these foreign devils have to have a new problem to deal with. It's not just the Chinese peasants they got to worry about. Now they got to worry about the United States, because in the past, the United States hadn't been interested because we had no influence in this part of the world. We had no interest, and we had no capability. Now we do, because we have a military base in the Philippines. We control the Philippines at that point. So it's just a hop, skip, and a jump, right? And so this completely changes the calculus in China. Of course, if you fast forward, this is the turn of the century we're talking about. And if you fast forward 125 years to today, who was our number one trading partner? This is the moment, just like the Spanish-American War was the moment our power elites hit the big time and learned that they could commit treason against the American people in their ambition and in their quest for basically world domination. It's a small matter to commit treason against the American people if it gets us what we want. So the Spanish-American War is sort of the gateway from treachery to treason. The open door letter that John Hay sends to China is the gateway to Chinese and American trade going forward. It's the beginning of what we see today. This is why the negotiations that are going on currently between the American government, the Trump administration, and China, these are complicated negotiations. And because this has been a relationship that goes back 125 years, and everyone's gotten used to a certain way of doing business. It's hard to change these two ships of state that are this big, this powerful, this wealthy, this entrenched. And it takes a while to change those sorts of destinies. So this leads to what we call the open door policy, which is our stipulation to the Chinese. Listen, we're not going to come in and zone you off. We're not coming to colonize you. We just want free trade with you. And this sounded good by comparison to what the Chinese had experienced with these other countries, which did come in and zone them off and exploit them, take advantage of them. And we sent them some goodies to try to get them on our side. We said, remember now, in the back of our minds, we're thinking this is the biggest export market we could ever achieve in the entire world. There is no bigger export market potentially than China. So if we will do what we have to. We don't want a war with them. It's the old sugar and spice, or the carrot or the stick. With Spain, we used a stick. With the Filipinos, we used the stick. With the Hawaiians, we used the stick. With the Cubans, we used the stick. But with China, we're going to use the carrot. And the carrot is free trade. The carrot is education. We'll spend our money to fund scholarships for Chinese students to come to America and take advantage, and then they can go back to China, take what they've learned, and help China. And boy, these are little goodies that we're offering to the Chinese that opened the door for us to begin trading with the Chinese, to create an export market, import-export market with China that continues to this day. So that's what I submit. I believe the Spanish-American War was about. Yes, short term, it was Cuba. Long term, it's Asia. Because you look what happened next. Right on the heels of that, we began interfering in this arrangement that these other countries had with China, and we began interfering in such ways to get the Chinese people, get them on our side, and portray ourselves as generous benefactors so that we can get access to their markets. And we've been trading with China, and the share of our trade to China has grown and grown and grown to the point that they are now our number one trading partner. That was the long-term goal of the Spanish-American War. Meanwhile, there's a war between Russia and Japan taking place. And I throw this in because in this part of the world, why we care about this is because they're fighting over Manchuria. Manchuria is the resource-rich part of China that they both have laid claim to, and now they're fighting over it. And now the United States, this is our first example to the Chinese people that we will intervene on your behalf. We actually honored our word in this situation. It wasn't because we cared so much about the Chinese people. Remember, we don't. The indigenous peoples matter nothing. Public interest does not matter. It's about profits. It's about resources. And Manchuria is the part of China that has all the resources. And right now, these foreign devils are fighting over it. And the Chinese, who in theory own it, have no say until we come along. And then President Roosevelt intervenes and tells Russia and tells Japan to knock it off. And he forces a peace between the Russians and the Japanese over the issue of Manchuria, even wins himself the Nobel Peace Prize over this, ostensibly because he negotiated a peaceful settlement. Really, his accomplishment was freeing up Manchuria for China, which ultimately means now America has access to Manchuria, where in the past it didn't. China didn't even have access to it. It was being fought over by Russia and Japan. So now China has access to its own resources, which means America, their new friend, the one who showed up and kicked the foreign devils out, now America has access to those resources and the trade markets. It was brilliant. Teddy Roosevelt, you could make an argument, is the reason we have the trade relationship with China to this day. He started it. All right, I'll conclude with this. I wanted to give you a few more examples of the interest in Asia all of a sudden. In this particular case, it's Japan. And this new relationship that we're trying to forge in Asia, because financially it's a boondoggle for us, the risk is that it's sort of risky back home, because back home we have been operating under this social Darwinist principle that there's fit and unfit people. And now here we are offering to educate Chinese students here in America. Included in that offer were Koreans and Japanese. In other words, these unfit are invading. If you looked at the pecking order at the turn of the century, whites were at the top, Asians were near the bottom. We had all sorts of stereotypes against Asians. And so many of these Asians took advantage of this offer by the United States government to come over and educate their kids, that these cities specific on the West Coast, specifically where they were landing, called it the Asian invasion. So many were coming, and they didn't like it. So here you have a U.S. policy, which is being uh, engineered by these power elites to enrich themselves and enrich America in the process, is running into the broadside right into an sort of an operating principle here in America that discriminates against Asians, right? That's the mindset, that social Darwinist mindset. In this pecking order, we may be unfit. The Irish immigrants, these immigrants from Russia, these immigrants from Eastern Europe, Western, but they at least are above the Asians. And now we got this Asian invasion going on, and all these kids are going to our schools with our kids, public schools with white students. So the San Francisco School Board uh, pulled rank and banned all these foreign students from going to public schools with the white students. Now, that means that the San Francisco School Board is usurping a policy, an agreement that was made out of Washington. And that's not going to stand because the power elites are going to look at that as a threat to this larger goal, which is this relationship we want to nurture with these Asian countries because of the trade possibilities, because of the natural resource possibilities. We just fought a war and earned this military base presence in the Philippines for that express purpose. And now you, the San Francisco School Board, is going to throw a monkey wrench in all that? I don't think so. So our government reaches a settlement with these countries, specifically Japan, but also with China, Korea, all these Asian countries, called the Gentleman's Agreement. And by virtue of this agreement, which agrees that they would limit, they won't send so many, is the point. Yeah, you're sending too many. Just don't send as many. So if you'll limit the number of your students that you're sending to America to study, we'll get the school board to call off the dogs, so to speak. So it's presented in such a way the school board can save face a little bit. But it's interesting how these broader goals don't get communicated down the chain sometimes. And that's where you end up with these little problems. And these problems stem from this mindset that the power elites have propagated that benefited them. Now it's not benefiting them. So when it benefits them, they hold to social Darwinism. When it doesn't, when it threatens the money spigot, when it threatens the relationship with these countries that control these resources, then they don't hold to it, or they make little compromises to try to smooth things over. It's funny, but it really demonstrates what's the important thing here. The important thing is the relationship with China specifically, but also Japan for trade purposes, for natural resource purposes. Teddy Roosevelt, this is the beginning of America becoming the world's policeman. And again, now understand this is all about China, because Japan, though it's very small, had an aggressive reputation and history towards China. China, though it's very large, had an inferiority complex when it came to Japan. It seemed like they always lost head-to-head confrontations. And Roosevelt was concerned about, and it wasn't because he himself saw problems coming. It was communicated to him from the Chinese government, hey, if we want, just like you helped us with this issue between the Russia and the Japanese, just like you helped us kicking out these foreign devils when they carved us up into these zones of occupation. Okay, one more thing you can do for us is protect us from Japan, because their greatest fear was the Americans would go back to America after having succeeded in launching this new era, so to speak, and they would allow, and Japan would just bide its time and wait for the Americans to go home, and then they would start rooting around in China again, causing problems. And the Chinese felt absolutely it's like a neutered dog. They could not stand up to the Japanese. So they were constantly worried about the Japanese. So they had made this fear known to Roosevelt. So Roosevelt decided to send a message to the Japanese that we are now boss in the Pacific. This base in the Philippines was so key. It He paints all our ships white because white reflects off the sun and the water, and it makes the ship appear even larger and more imposing than it actually is. And he sends this armada of 16 white painted battleships on a goodwill tour to Japan. This is the second time we've used the U.S. Navy to intimidate the Japanese. We talked about the earlier example when our admiral sailed into their harbor to help the Japanese uh, along in the trade negotiations with the United States. We made them an offer that they couldn't refuse. It worked once. Now it's going to work again. Roosevelt sends this, quote, great white fleet on a tour. Of course, Japan's a bunch of islands. He just sails in and around, and he's, imagine being Japanese and you wake up and every morning there's these American ships in your harbor and they're sailing around and it's just a show of force. Not much different from what Trump did recently when he met with Vladimir Putin in Alaska, and as soon as Putin got off his plane, here comes an American B-12 bomber flying low and right over his head, and there's a picture of Putin turning and looking. And it was a show of force. Presidents do this all the time. Roosevelt is doing this not because he cares so much about China. He cares about that trade relationship that he's nurturing. He cares about the new markets that the Chinese represent. He cares about the natural resources. This is why John Hay created the letter. This is why we have this new open door policy. This is why we've warned off all these other countries. The U.S. is now the big dog, and we're calling the shots now. And this is why we fought the Spanish-American War. You take the Spanish-American War out of this equation, you don't have Cuba. But more importantly, you don't have the Philippine Islands on which you can put this base from which you can send out the Great White Fleet to intimidate Japan into submission, from which you can threaten Russia and Japan to make peace in their Russo-Japanese war with their knowledge that you can reach out and touch them because you have a base in their part of the world now. From which you can tell the Chinese, we are now here to protect you. We will be your benefactors as long as we have access to your markets and trade and resources. I mean, the Philippines is the plum. It is the key that opened up Asia to us. So Spanish-American War was not so much about Spain, not so much about Cuba, though we obviously benefited by getting access to Cuba's resources and markets, etc. It's about the Philippines and getting access to land or territory that we can, in a part of the world we had no previous access to. And now, all of a sudden, we're not just sitting on that land, we're using that. We're using that presence to exert influence in that part of the world and open up that part of the world to our trade. This was all launched on a series of lies, propaganda, and a false flag. Engineered why? By these power elites who wanted access to Cuba like they'd gotten access to Hawaii. And then all these other benefits flow from it. And of course, if you're one of these power elites, you're realizing, wow, this works. This works. And anytime in the future we have a situation like this, or we have an agenda that follows this same line of thinking, we'll just use this same template. We use the same pattern, and we'll just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And that's what they've been doing for over 125 years. So again, this is a series to talk about the evolution of the power elites in our society, which we now call, they called them power elites back then. Now we call them the deep state. It's these 50 or 60 men who run these corporations. They're all about maximizing profits. They operate by the ultra-vires doctrine. Right now, they're outside the government using their campaign donations to control their rented and owned politicians. After World Wars I and II, they'll actually be inside the government, and ultra-vires will make it inside the government, become the operating principle of our United States government. And that's why, we have the problems we have today with our lack of trust in government, lack of credibility of government institutions. I just watched some hearings yesterday about public health, CDC, NIH, FDA, the public health in our country. We are the sickest country in the world, and no one believes these public health ministers anymore because that ultra-virus doctrine has seeped into the public institutions of our government. And now all these people, all they care about is profits as well. And the public interest be damned. So while the public gets sicker and sicker and sicker, they get richer and richer and richer. Now, extrapolate that out over all of the government institutions, over all of the government, in its endeavors. You can see why ultra-vires is so dangerous. It's treacherous when it's in the private sector. It's capitalism run amok when it's in the private sector. When it bleeds into and becomes part of and takes complete ownership of, and the government becomes a wholly owned subsidiary of ultra-vires, then it becomes dangerous. It becomes treasonous because it becomes policy to lie to and betray the American people, to overthrow presidents who might become obstacles figuring out what's going on, to overthrow their government. That's treason. And it all stems back from this ultra-virus doctrine and the rise of corporations. And now these power elites have actually engineered a war to their advantage. And it worked. And so why would they not repeat it? Why wouldn't they do it again? That's it for today. Thank you for joining. Please subscribe to my channel, smash the like button, and feel free to comment and or share with others. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.